Welcome. My name is Sue Liburd, and it is my absolute pleasure to be the host of this first opening launch event of Black Inclusion Week. We have got a fabulous, I think, lineup throughout this week, but we've also got a fabulous lineup in terms of today. So I'm going to ask you all, we've got a large number of people who have signed up to attend today, which is absolutely fabulous. So I'm going to ask you all just to be active participants in today. This is not just a webinar where you're just going to sit back and, like little birds in a nest, just be fed. We want some engagement from you. So to start off with, how about you just put in into the chat or into the Q&A your name and geographically where you're located. Let's see where everybody is. That would be absolutely fabulous. And of course, as we go throughout our time together, so we're kicking off now, obviously at 11:30, and then until 1 o'clock. If you want to just pop into the Q&A, into the chat, would be fabulous. Not only just your questions, but also what are you doing to be the change? So let me just, set a little bit of context in terms of today. It's hard to believe, isn't it, that a year has passed when we had, the world saw the horrific murder of George Floyd. Absolutely shocking. It sparked a global movement. And in sparking a global movement, what we found that there was a momentum, dialogue was happening, people wanted to take action. And what was fabulous for this particular movement was that Fiona Daniel and Paul Cisse came together as friends and as colleagues, and they said, we need to do something. And together they put a shout out, they put a call out to Black leaders. And they said to all of us, we need to maintain this momentum. What can we do? And we came in numbers. We came together and we started to think about what it is that we could do. We talked about education, we talked about community, we talked about business. And the Black Inclusion Week came out of that discussion. So a small group of volunteers came together and created it as a work stream. And no money's changed hands here. People have just found time off the edge of their desks and increasingly more and more time to bring this campaign to life. So not only did Black Inclusion Week get born out of the shocking, as we've said, and horrific murder of George Floyd, its momentum was sustained, as we saw here in the UK, because of the pandemic, the exacerbation of inequalities within the Black community. So what is it that we want to achieve by having Black Inclusion Week? And I'm sure all of you that have signed up and have been following us on LinkedIn and continue to do that, and on Facebook and on all of the other social media networks that we're on, you know what we're standing for. But one of the key things for me personally is that this is not just about commemorating history. This is about, and at the heart is of our campaign this year, is how we show up and how we be the change. And I say we, that is us as Black people, but also our allies and our supporters. So we want this week to be inspirational. We want it to be engaging. We want it to be a catalyst for change. We want it to be thought-provoking. And that takes all of us to play our part. So what have we got planned then for our time today, our time together? In a short while, I'm going to hand over to Lord Simon Woolley, who is going to deliver our keynote. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time. We've invited some friends and colleagues and allies to tell us why they think that Black inclusion is important. And then we've got a fabulous panel. And the panel I will introduce a little bit later. I'm not going to introduce them all now, and we're going to have some really, I think, wide-reaching discussion about why Black inclusion matters, and why inclusion matters, and to explore what are some of the things that we can do about it. All right. So I want you to saddle up. I hope you've got a cup of tea or cup of coffee or whatever your tipple is, and that you're ready for something that's going to be, I hope, a catalyst for change for you. Spark some thinking, be engaging, and let's have some conversation. And it's great. I can just see now coming into the chat, people are posting, and it looks as though we've got a really wide reach, which is absolutely fabulous. So I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Lord Simon Woolley. Now, Lord Simon Woolley, for me, is, one of my heroes. So Lord Simon Woolley is the director and one of the founders of Operation Black Vote. And Operation Black Vote, for those of you that don't know, is a national and internationally renowned race equality organisation. And over the last 25 years, Lord Woolley has helped transform our political and civic institutions, ensuring that inclusivity has been on the agenda, representation has been on the agenda. And one of the amazing things for me that came out of the work of Operation Black Vote was the launch of the groundbreaking Colour of Power. And this was a really in-depth look at the racial makeup of Britain's top jobs across, a number of sectors, 28, 30 sectors, if I recall. And Lord Woolley's had an opportunity to influence really and truly at the highest levels, as you can imagine, and is one of the architects behind the UK's Race Disparity Unit. He's served as the advisory chair since its inception. And it's absolute pleasure. Lord Woolley received a knighthood in 2019 in the birthday honours and for services to race and equality. And he was nominated for a Life Peerage in the same year. So Simon, can I invite you just to set the tone and launched today's event with some words of wisdom from you. Simon. Simon, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. I'm waiting for the host to let me in.
Okay, if you'd like to pop your camera on.
So he's done that right now.
Voilà.
Hi, Sue, and what a wonderful introduction. And what a great honor to be the inaugural keynote speaker at such a wonderful event. You and I was on this call about 35 minutes ago, just, the usual preparation. And I was listening to you and your team. And one of the things that your team said was, oh my God, I cannot believe we've done it. We just thought about it and here we are today, launching. And I was struck by that. Very, very struck, Sue. Not least because I, like you and your wonderful team, I'm an activist. I call myself an activist and a disciple of Dr. Martin Luther King. And many of you know, you will have his picture, his speech on your wall. Dr. King had a dream, but he had more than a dream, he had a plan. And step one of that plan was to politically empower African Americans, to be in a situation where we're not asking for justice, equality, but demanding it, making it our God-given right to afford us equality of opportunity so that we can be who we're meant to be, so we can excel, so we can deliver great things, not just for ourselves or our community, but for wider society. And the reason why I mentioned that was when listening to you, that I see you all as disciples of Dr. Martin Luther King. Because you had how can I put this? A blank sheet of paper, nothing on it. And you responded. You responded to the trauma and the drama and the hurt of what I describe as the double pandemic. On one side, you had the devastating impact that COVID-19 has wrought upon our communities. We're 4 times more likely to die. We were 5 times more likely to catch this deadly disease. It affected our health, our education, our housing, the criminal justice, all these inequalities were laid bare. And then, as you mentioned, we had to see a man, our brother, die right in front of our eyes. And we knew, like many people around the world knew, it wasn't just the knee that killed George Floyd, it was the American system. And we also knew that it wasn't just the American system that holds Black people back. We can't breathe. It's also here in the UK too, and across the globe. But here's the magic of this. Here's the specialness. So you responded. You and Paul and Aji and Terence and the other team members said, we are going to do something about it. And this is your response to bring us here, to do a number of things, I would argue. So one is to come together as Black and brown people. I've seen some of your names. I wish I could see your faces. Julie, Carol, Diana, Matt, Faith, Paul, Paula, Ali, Sarah. There are, I would say, more than 150 people who have responded to you, Sue and Paul. And in that response, the conversation that we want today primarily is about leadership. And the Black and brown leadership, supported by allies in all areas, at all levels of our society, will make the changes, will transform our society. I mean, it's been such a traumatic year. I would argue that this should be an historical start to monstrous change. In 50 years' time, 100 years' time, historians will look back on 2020 and 2021 and see what unfolded, this double pandemic, this perfect storm. And so they will ask but one question, I would argue. Historians will look back and say, after such a devastating year, what did Black people do? What did society do? What was their response? And I would argue that we have three answers to that response. We can do nothing. We can do something, a little bit, tweak around the edges here, tweak around the edges there. Or we can do something dramatic. We can have that, if you like, 1945 moment after the Great Wars. I mean, what happened in the last year has been as dramatic, as traumatic as a war. Definitely the amount of money we've spent is likened to a world war. We spent billions of pounds on this dynamic, this pandemic. Will we do something special? And I keep hearing people talking about we're going to build back better. I don't want to go back, because going back wasn't great. Our life chances were still blighted, still shackled by gross structural inequality that has just been exacerbated by what has occurred in the past year in education, in jobs. You know, in jobs, of course, we had to apply 80% more applications than white people just to get to go. I don't want to build back. I don't want to go back to that. We have to have our children's examination papers, I'm talking about Black children, we have to have them marked blindly for them not to be marked down. I don't want to go back. You know, last year, in terms of everybody being 95% locked down, we barely went out the house because we were frightened of this deadly disease. Stop and search for young Black men went up by 25%. I don't want to go back. Back was bad in terms of race inequality. This conversation, this process today going forward should be engaged in building new, not building back better, building new better. Building infrastructures, building opportunities, building pathways for our children, for our brothers and sisters to take off the shackles of inequality and begin to be the individuals that we deserve to be, that our society wants. It starts here. It starts here, Julie, Carol, Matt, Faith, Paul, and many of the others. It starts here and it starts today. And let me just say this. For years, decades, probably centuries, we have a society, an infrastructure that has told people who look like me, look like many have looked like you, you're not quite good enough. You need a bit of mentoring. You need to have a bit more learning. Can you please get to the back of the queue and we'll tell you when we're ready for you to be leaders. They've told our children, we're not good enough. Our parents always told us, you need to study harder. You need to be faster. You need to be stronger. You need to be better. We've always been told this. You know, in the end, we start believing it. We start believing that we're not good enough. We start believing that we cannot apply for the top jobs. We kind of justify when we see others in our company, in an organization, who have come from behind and go ahead of us. Oh, and hear this. We often train them for them to leapfrog us. This is what society has done to us. And I'm a big fan of Paul and what he's been trying to do to elevate Black success. I'm telling you, if nothing else today, we have to stop doubting ourselves. There will be a plethora of people that will tell you you're not good enough. You need to wait in line. You need to do some learning. Don't you be the one that doubts your talent. Today, your role is, for the first time in this turbocharged fashion that Paul and his team want, is for you to come out of the shadows of leadership, to come into that light, to come into that space and say, to look into the mirror and say, it's my turn. My turn to show what I can do, not just for me, not just for my community, but for the whole of society. And in that, you will find that a weight comes off you. And you will find, actually, I've been doing this all along, but I've been hiding it. And I can do so much more. That's why when Paul asked me to be part of this, I said yes, because this is our time. I want to finish on this. I was a bit nervous over the weekend with the elections because it didn't look as though the Black voices, Black faces, Black and brown faces would come to the fore, and yet they did. Think about this. Over the weekend, 3 people were elected to big cities. Bristol, Marvin Rees, Joanne Anderson, and Sadiq Khan in London. All of these 3 individuals are descendants of either enslaved Africans or of colonized countries. And these 3 people who are descendants of that history are now running those cities that enriched themselves, that were at the epicenter of our misery, the way that we were put down. It's a great story. We need to celebrate it. They have come out to be the leaders we want them to be. Today, Sue, it's you, Paul, and others. It's our turn to be the leaders that our communities demand. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words at this inaugural event. I want it to be bigger and better year on year on year, to nurture a deluge of talent that will go in every space, in every walk of society, in all areas to show what great Black Britain can be.
Simon, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And as you'll see coming through the chat, people are echoing my thank you. Absolutely inspirational, absolutely on message as you always are. You just find always the right pulse and the right tone. And I'm thanking you because we're hearing people say, we don't want to go back. We don't want to build back better. Actually, building new opportunity, absolutely. And as a Black community, as well as with our allies, we become one community. And with a creative, commitment, a creative commitment towards change, with an acknowledgement and a celebration of Black people, particularly in the UK, with people coming out from the shadows, together, I think we can create some significant change. So it's incumbent on us all to be the change.
It is. We get told, and I don't know, we just need to unshackle ourselves from that prism. And I promise you, Sue, that we have amongst us so many wonderful people that will do great things. And this is not a zero-sum game. Just because I'm successful doesn't mean other people can't be. We just get bigger, we just get better. And I love what you said about the allies. Sometimes when a white man or a white woman says, I hear you, I feel your pain, we need to do something about it together, then this is not about them and us, it's about us together.
Together we can create the change. Together we can be the change. And that's our hashtag. So connecting through collaboration, together we can be the change. Simon, thank you. Thank you.
Great day.
Thank you.
A wonderful day today. And I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you, Sue. I'm with you, Paul, Cisse, super brother, super sister. I'm with you all, heart and soul. You run with this. You run fast, you run hard, you run to great success.
Thank you. And as you quite rightly pointed out, a small group of people coming together behind an idea, and look what happens. As we said, Paul, the team, Fiona, and and you mentioned, thank you, you gave a shout out to a couple of other people who are sitting behind the scenes. Yeah. Aggie Matuma, honestly, in terms of Black Inclusion Week, has been an absolute rock. She has gone far and beyond, exceeded everything that has ever been asked of her to make sure that we got this event today. Also, Cecilia Matuma Nawebo, also sitting behind the scenes systematically. We've got Jennifer Thomas, we've got Hannah Litt, we've got obviously Paul, Fiona, we've got, as well as all of the speakers.
Don't forget you. Don't forget
you. Me just doing my little bit.
It's big, it's big. Come on. Own the leadership. Own your role. Own your role. Let's not be shrinking violets.
Yeah.
We have work to do.
Yeah.
This after today, you have to walk 10 feet tall. It's not about being puffed up. It's not about being big-headed. It's about being focused on a mission to be success in a world that creates equality of opportunity, that creates a sense of belonging, that tackles those people that will keep us all down. We have to do that too.
Thank you. Thank you. Simon, absolute pleasure. Thank you. So, to the team that's sitting behind, I think it's absolutely a wonderful opportunity for us to share a video if we can get that to play. One of the things we did, we went out to friends and allies and colleagues, and we asked them, why does Black inclusion matter? Why is it important? And we've got a compilation of some of their views. So let's see if we can get this to play.
Black inclusion is important to me, especially regarding young black men from lower income families. Black inclusion will give them an opportunity to prove that they can become focused and can become entrepreneurs that ultimately give back to their communities.
Black Inclusion Week is important because we cannot go back to where we were. We have to keep these conversations going, we have to keep these commitments going, and we have to keep this action going. That's why Black Inclusion Week is important. It's an annual chance to remember, to recommit, and to take action.
Well, it's absolutely crucial for a fair society. And black inclusion is an area that is seriously lacking, where big important decisions are made, for example, in company boardrooms and in government. And that means the black experience, the black perspective, the barriers and prejudices we face are rarely considered.
To me, Black Inclusion Week means that we all stop, look at ourselves in the mirror, see where exclusion exists, and then make positive, tangible, felt actions to do whatever is necessary to make inclusion a top priority as a need to have and not just a nice to have.
Black inclusion is important to me because I want my own children to thrive. I want them to thrive in a world where they are not discriminated against because of the colour of their skin.
Black Inclusion Week matters because we need space to come together as one community, to heal, to share, to raise awareness, to celebrate. This week is for us.
Black inclusion is important to me because I believe that equality is the lifeblood of any progressive society. In fact, I think societies are allergic to inequality because it leads to deprivation and it affects the mental health of the whole country. But more importantly, societies that are fairer and more inclusive allow every child the opportunity to be the best that they can possibly be, regardless of their ethnicity or their skin colour.
Black inclusion is really important to me. It's not just about diversity with hitting certain numbers, it's actually about creating that inclusive environment where someone can genuinely bring their true self to work.
Black inclusion is important to me because everybody should be treated equally. Thank you.
So black inclusion is really important to me because we all need to be treated fairly, regardless of your race, your background, your gender, your sexuality. Everyone is treated with respect, and we need to get to a place where that happens all the time.
Black inclusion is incredibly important to me. No one should be treated differently because of the colour of their skin, and it's a problem that should never have existed, let alone still be seen in today's society in 2021. We need to change history, we need to work together, we need to stamp out discrimination, we need to call it out, and we need to work towards a more inclusive future so that everybody is treated equally.
Black Inclusion Week is important. It's important because it makes the invisible visible. It allows us as black people to talk about the challenges and the barriers that we face on a day-to-day basis in society and in our communities. And together with friends and allies, it allows us to talk about how we can overcome these barriers and these challenges going forward. But Black Inclusion Week is also important to recognise our achievements and to celebrate our successes. That's why I think Black Inclusion Week is very important.
Black inclusion is extremely important to me because no one should be discriminated against because of their ethnic persuasion, background, whatever. Discrimination is wrong. Right now is the right time for all these positives to be highlighted. We all deserve to thrive from this.
So just a couple of views from some of our friends and some of our allies. So possibly you would like to pop into the chat some of the reasons why you think Black inclusion is important. That'd be great. Let's hear some of your views also. So as we're coming up to midday, what would be absolutely fabulous, like I say, if we hear from you, just keep popping things in the chat. We are scanning those, and we will hopefully pick up some of those themes. But what we want to do now is to explore different aspects of the Black experience. And to do that, what we've done is we've brought together, I think, a really powerful panel. Some really interesting speakers with some interesting perspectives. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation. So this is not going to be just a series of presentations. Where there's some data, what we have done is made sure that there are a couple of slides. We're very conscious that some people are very visual, so just hearing stats doesn't necessarily land. So we have some data slides, but otherwise we're going to have a bit more of a discourse around different aspects of the Black experience and what inclusion really means. So allow me to introduce you to our panel members. Again, I know when you were signing up, you would have seen some of the descriptors, but let me just see if I can bring out some of those key highlights of the people we've got sitting around the table. So let me start off, first of all, we've got Zaina Ratti. Now, Zaina is a hypnotherapist with a particular speciality. And that speciality is what's called GSRD. So for those of you that don't know, we're talking about gender, sex, relationship, diversity. So she's a race and ethnicity hypnotherapist. And she's also a speaker, she's also a columnist, she's also an educator, award-winning. She was Stonewall's person of colour role model. She has her own private practice, as well as seeing people from marginalised groups. She is a huge advocate, and honestly, she is just absolutely, you're going to be blown away by some of the sharings that Zaina brings to our conversation. Pronouns she and her, by the way. Okay. So we also have Shane Ryan. Okay, so Shane, absolute campaigner, author, justice campaigner, global executive director of the AVAST Foundation, and tireless campaigner for justice, equality, well-being and opportunity. Over 25 years worth of experience as a charity CEO. You're going to hear about philanthropy, you're going to hear about social mobility when we get into some of our conversation. Shane was deputy director at the National Lottery Community Fund. So we're going to really and truly squeeze the juices, as one of my usual phrases, out from some of Shane's experiences. It's honestly, go on to to the profile and just read some of our speakers' background. I also, somebody very, very close and dear to my heart is Ifra Samata. Now, Ifra is an educator, an author, a mental health and social action activist and campaigner. And she's been, over the last 10 years, working in education and charity and community, particularly in terms of young people. And she's got so she's going to bring that community lens to what we're going to be talking about. And our final panelist is Sandra Kerr, CBE. And Sandra works together with business leaders and government policy makers, and is highly, again, like everybody else, highly, highly influential. Prior to working with business in the community, Sandra worked for DWP and the Cabinet Office. Sandra, I always, whenever I'm introducing Sandra, I always want to acknowledge the fact that she was awarded originally an MBE, and that continued work has meant that that award was further honoured. And in 2012, we had a further acknowledgement. I'm just trying to think of all of the dates, Sandra, forgive me. So 2012, OBE in the Queen's Honours Award, and in 2019 it was the CBE, if I remember correctly. So everybody, without with pleasure, I'm going to say some things pinging through. I don't know if that's just chat or something else. Some things pinging through, but hopefully that's not going to interrupt or disrupt our discussion. So without further ado, this amazing panel, hopefully the panel's managed to come up and you can see everybody and appear on your screen. What we're going to do is, how about, Sandra, this week as we explore culture and the lived experience of Black people, if we believe that inclusion creates better business, better education, better community, improved social mobility, how do we achieve real inclusion? So with that lens, can we start with you, maybe to share some of the, the Black voice reporting?
Thank you very much, Sue. And I just want to commend, the Black Leaders Network for, it's one thing to be around the dining table or virtual table and say, let's get something started to get this fabulous week established. So I am going to share some stats. So I'm going to just quickly run you through some slides, which you can share afterwards, because it really matters that you know the numbers, you know the data, so that people can't say, oh, we don't have a problem here. You can provide evidence that actually, let's look at what the story is telling us. So first, what I want to flag is the importance of knowing the data. So 24 billion per annum is what the UK would gain annually through inclusion and checking and tackling all the disparities in the labour market. 36% better financial returns on those who've got greater diversity at the top table. Less than 2% representation when we look at Black leaders, be it in business, education, judiciary in the UK, when it should be closer to over 3%. And then £4.33 is the pay disparity if you're a Black or white graduate. And then when we look at that pyramid, the future is diverse. 1 in 4 of children in primary and secondary school are from an ethnic minority background, 1 in 8 of working age, and 1 in 16 when we look at the top, but only 1 in 10 in the workplace because there are unemployment disparities. In 2020, our campaign celebrated 25 years. We noted Windrush Day on the 22nd of June, with Race at the Top was visited, where we flagged, hold on a minute, how come there's only 2%, under 2% across the top tables in the UK? And then we launched the Black Voices report following the brutal killing of George Floyd, flagging the 3 priority areas of leadership, allyship, employees and communities. So really saying employers need to include voices at the top table where you're making decisions that impact them. Allies, it was great to see Black and white people out together saying, no way, the future has to be different. And then the third piece, the really listening and taking action once you've heard from your employees, and including in that, them connecting with communities, and as part of that, including Black enterprise in your supply chains. Currently, we have 681 employers who have signed a Race at Work Charter. If your organization hasn't, you need to encourage them to start, because this is about making change and adding ethnicity and inclusion into strategies. That's from the Black Voices report that you need to get familiar with, and you can download this for free on the BITC website. 33% when we asked people about will they think their ethnicity is going to be a barrier, compared to 1%. 33% of Black respondents said yes, they see their ethnicity as a potential barrier. 31% said yes to they'd like a sponsor, the highest rate of all ethnicity groups in the UK. And 49%, only 49% of Black respondents said they feel they get credit for their work. So that's another thing that we must tackle to ensure you get credit for your work, your contributions, and your ideas. Other numbers to know, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week, but I wonder if this stat of 29% of Black women in any 1 week reporting a common mental health disorder, and this is from 2014 stats, which I'm going to try and get updated. The second big number to be aware of, 35%, that is Black youth unemployment at the moment, compared to 13% of white youth. So really need to make sure that the disparities are tackled and addressed. And then ethnicity pay gap reporting, we don't want it to be voluntary, we need it to be mandatory. So employers, and they need to de-aggregate the data to look at the pay of their Black employees compared to other ethnicity groups, so those disparities can be addressed. And then finally, I want to encourage you to use your voice. The Race at Work survey is open. This is the data that we use to create the Black Voices report. We will be able to give a hot off the press response to what our employees saying across the UK about their lived experience in the workplace, and it tackles leadership, overlooked for promotion. It looks at bullying, harassment, and it looks at allyship. So I'm encouraging everyone on this call today to take some practical action, fill out the survey, and let your voice be heard. Deadline 30th of June. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sandra. Thank you, thank you. So, you know, for inclusion to happen, it's really important that we've got, you know, voices are heard. And this is just one mechanism to ensure that voices get heard. To our panel, when it comes to, you know, Black voices being heard, have you got anything to add to that? Have you got anything that you're either running, that you're aware of, that you know about? And also, you know, those of you, you know, that are participants, you know, in the chat, have you got also some things that are running in your organisations, or that you're aware of, or in your communities, whereby the Black voice can be heard? So to the rest of the panellists, why is, you know, the Black voice, hearing the Black voice, so important? Shane.
Well, I just think to start with, I think some of that's quite stark information that Sandra's giving. And for me, it's what I'm finding is already in what I want to say later. It comes up now automatically. It's just the fact that much of what happens here is from people not including our voices in the first place in their processes and procedures. So, and there's so much responsible for this. I'm going to talk later about tech and how the same thing happens there. But just the fact that I think today is testament to the fact that there's a huge amount happening at the moment. We've seen recently with the report a few weeks ago that there's almost this indifference to social reality happening in certain spaces, and that in itself is oppressive and undermining, and it's a powerful tool though in the retention of existing power dynamics. And so hearing people's voices, and so Sandra giving call to action there, that clarion call to actually for us to be heard, is really, really important at this time, because what happens otherwise is that people completely ignore our voices, deliberately almost. And for me, that deepens the divides and the default discrimination that we already see.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shane. Thank you. Any of our other panelists want to comment or expand on some of the stuff that Sandra has shared? Zaina.
I guess when I'm thinking of my own profession as a psychotherapist and that not being heard, quite often that's because predominantly whiteness is the default for mental health. You know, we are unheard, we are othered, we are minimized in spaces and not given a seat at the table to be able to discuss and build a better mental health service for everyone that's culturally competent, that has equity, not just equality at its heart.
Thank you. Thank you. Sandra, in your experience, what stops people either contributing meaningfully to you know, surveys and questionnaires, or just not finding the space to have their voices heard?
I think when it comes down to questionnaires, people sometimes think, oh, what's the point? But this is not the time for that. If ever there was a time to make sure that your voice is heard, that there isn't a perception, oh, that's done. Oh, no one said anything. Nothing much has come out of that. Because I believe some people would want to believe that that's the truth. So I can appreciate, because we know the trauma of watching George Floyd killed. People just feel tired. You know, they just felt, can't believe that we haven't made the progress that we should make. So, and historically, I have to except that I think many have been fearful of speaking up. Why? Because they've seen when people have spoken up, there's a backlash, career death, under the carpet, you know, what's going on. It seems like, you know, everything's shut down around me. But what we have different now is that we do have allies. We have people who have stood up and who have said, look, we want to be part of the solution, and we do need together. We need everyone together. We can't just have just Black people caring about this or just white people. You know, we need that togetherness. And I think the time is over for silence. And I have to say, as somebody who, as you know, I'm a public campaigner, but sometimes there would be things that would go on in the workplace and I'd see it and I'd think, oh, you know, but now, no, nothing is getting allowed, but it's how you do it. It's about getting that tone. And that's why I'm saying when you have data and numbers, you can start that conversation to say, what do we think this is saying to us? And start that conversation. And we are all responsible. We can't just sit back and say, oh, it doesn't matter. You've got to be brave and willing to open your mouth. And as I say, if you get the tone right, actually you can get and some numbers in there to get people thinking. You can get allies and people actually mobilizing and speaking up as well, so that you're not the only voice. So I think the more alliances you can get, the better, because then you just feel like, why do I have to, you know, rather than why do I have to bring up the issue? Cannot someone else say, hold on a minute, that doesn't sound right to me? So that's what we want to do, and mobilize all voices together on this.
Thank you very much. I mean, one of the things for me is often, particularly as we move around organisations, you will hear underrepresented groups do the, I can't get heard, I can't find my voice. And what is, I think, absolutely fantastic, and I mean fantastic with capital letters, around things like this survey. And some other people are posting some things about what they're doing also to make sure that the Black voice is heard. But equally, this afternoon, we have a session on the Black Inclusion Index. So again, if you can't get your voice heard in some quarters, there are other mechanisms, and surveys and questionnaires adding to the data. Once we've got data, we can do something meaningful with it. Data drives everything, very much so, yeah. So I'm encouraging everybody, please, 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 you know, find an opportunity to share your views, share your opinions. This isn't just about being Black people, this is also our allies and our supporters, everybody together to share a view and opinion. So Sandra, thank you. Statistics, you know, startling, you know, they are interesting, and let's add to them that richness of data. So to add to keep our conversation moving along, and like I say, you know, there's some beautiful comments about, you know, staying silent is no longer an option for anyone. Thank you, David. So it's not an option, everybody. Okay, this is part of our activism. This is part of why you've signed up to different experiences and events today, and throughout this week and beyond. Silence, not an option. Indifference, not an option. Okay. So how about coming back to our theme around inclusion and the experience? How about we hear from Ifra? Ifra, you know, community, activism, mental health, allyship. Let's hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Sue. And can I just say how incredibly proud I am of our Black Leaders Network and Inclusive Companies, all the team that put this together. This is incredible. As I was looking at the numbers of the people that are joining us today, so it's nice to see everyone here today as well. And this conversation is so important. As the last comment just said, staying silent is not an option any longer, and we have to keep talking. And to keep talking starts off with listening. As Sandra said, listening and making sure that we acknowledge the important things that need to be listened to for the Black voice to be heard. And the important thing to start off with is understanding that the Black identity comes in many forms, and it's beyond a tick in a diversity box organizations and government and people just need to figure out disadvantaged communities and underrepresented voices. There is so much excellence and talents within our identity, and we come in languages, in faith, in culture, and so many things that makes the Black voice so diverse in the richness of what it can contribute to the conversation. So if you're not listening, you're missing out on all of that inclusion in very important conversations. And so right now, we're talking about is the fact that this whole month actually was mental health awareness conversation. And that stats that we just saw right now, the fact that 29% of Black women are reporting a mental health condition like on a weekly basis, that was quite shocking to hear. But when we look at the inequality in mental health, it's staggering. Black patients are more likely to be sectioned more than white patients. And when we look at how the conversation of mental health happens, it's the hashtags and the kind of mental health matters with empty words without actions. So that is the most important thing that we all have to do when we're talking about mental health, when we're talking about inclusion, when we're talking about community cohesion, when we're talking about all of things, then we have to make sure that it's followed with action. And that's kind of like how I wanted to start off like this part of our conversation. And yeah.
Thanks, Ifra. Conscious that you've got some drilling and some work going on, haven't you? Literally just outside your window.
Why I was rushing, because I was like, I have got to say something, but he keeps every second. The joy of Zoom.
I'm really sorry, Ifra. I'm really sorry. I was saying to you, oh, it'll be fine. It will, your mic will dampen the noise, but all of a sudden it's kind of come to the fore. I apologize.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, I hope like that. I was just trying to like rush it. Every time he's drilling, I'm like, okay, get to the drill part again.
Not to worry. Some of your significant points are, have landed. So, but mental health and that community perspective, really important. So to the other panelists, based on that mental health, that community lens, anything you want to comment on, anything you want to add? A question from me, Ifra. Oh, sorry, Sandra.
Yeah, I mean, we are really pushing and encouraging corporates to think about as they talk to their employees, how that enables them to connect to communities who often are at the back of the queue when it comes down to donations, volunteering, all the other kind of resources that exist, but also inclusion of Black enterprise in supply chains, getting on government supply lists and all of the other things that are linked to the economic prosperity of communities, and also some of the just systemic challenges around the funding streams that are available. So really wanting to think about everybody across the landscape, be they employed, self-employed. We know even as a self-employed person, you need access to contracts, you need access to those networks, and it not be, multiple rounds of try again, or going around in circles, or feeling you need to send a white colleague to bid for work. We've heard these things in the past, and these are some of the things we want to be part of the past, and we want the government to lead from the front in this by making sure that everybody in their supply chain is really being actively inclusive and can demonstrate by evidence and by data that they are being inclusive.
And Ifra, I'd also like to add is, a reminder to everybody that the reality is sometimes, particularly those of us that work very much within organisations as opposed to being active in local community work, is that we have a tendency to almost put, our filter bubbles or put, containers around people, forgetting that every single one of us, live within a community, and that, our thinking, our behaviour, our activism, our behaviour doesn't just stop as we walk out of, the metaphorical door of work. We're walking into family and we're walking into community. So some of this thinking is rippling and needs to ripple out into the communities that we are part of, so that the change isn't just organisational led. Yeah. So Ifra, anything else you particularly want people to hear, you know, allyship and activism, for example?
Allyship means action, as simple as I can explain it without my feeling in the background. So when we see when we see things going on in our society, whether it is you want to take part in mental health campaigns, you want to take part in the conversation of inclusion, this whole week with Inclusion Week and everything that we're doing, it means action. To all the people who are here today, you've started that first step by being in this conversation. Now, the Black Leaders Network is here after today and way beyond that. So take part in the conversation, support the work that we're doing, and make sure that you're talking to each other, to your organizations, to your communities. And please understand that when we're talking about listening to the Black voice, the diversity within the identity is something that's so important to be heard. As a Muslim woman, for me to be only called on in conversations when we're talking about security risk or things like that, that's not really including me in a conversation, that's stereotyping me into a box that you want to make sure that I tick for you as an organization. And so it's so important that you're not stereotyping people, that you're actually acknowledging the intelligence as well as the contribution and the important voice that people can add to the conversation. But yeah, like I said, we're starting today and we're going to keep going, and together we can achieve that. Yeah, we change.
Thank you. And thank you to the drilling outside. That was a suitable pause, enough for you to get that message out. Fabulous. But actually, what I think is that beautifully segues us into some of the points that I think Zaina would like to bring, particularly, around internet intersectionality, particularly around, mixed heritage. So, Zaina, can I invite you to, come off mute and to share some of your thinking? How do we achieve real inclusion through that lens of intersectionality?
I think if it's, we're told in some sectors, and I've been told this as a professional, that there's no longer an issue. And I always think that it's like smoke under a door. The fire still rages outside, and, very few of us have the resilience to walk through it. We need allies. We can't be expected to be the educator every time. Ignoring and not looking at our own cultural competences, not looking at our own intersectionalities. If we continue to ignore the intersections around disability, sexuality, gender, age, even class, we're ignoring what our intersections are. I encourage people that everyone has an intersection. You might be a parent, your gender might be an intersection. There will always be something. It's those crossovers that Kimberly Crenshaw meant, and not necessarily the actual structure itself. We have, I'm a private practice psychotherapist, because of the racial pay gap, there's social and economical inequalities. There's a familial attitude to mental health. All of these things prevent people from accessing mental health care. I always think that it's a concrete ceiling. It's not a glass one. We can't see above it. You cannot be what you cannot see. We need people to stand up to have these challenging conversations, even around, as a therapist, looking at those therapeutic texts. So looking at Freud, looking at Jung, and going, how can we view them through a contemporary intersectional lens right now? How can they be useful for everyone that we're seeing? True intersectionality in therapy, it's about the acknowledgement of the hierarchy of marginalization. I'm mixed heritage, and I go into some places and maybe I don't feel Black enough to be Black. Maybe I don't feel white enough to be white. There are very few clients that don't present with some type of internalized phobia. That comes from the media. Look at the representation of Black mental health in the media. We absorb this by osmosis. When I go into spaces and I encounter minimization and racism from fellow professionals, there there is a long way to go. There is a huge mountain to climb, but it's one that we can climb together. When I publicized this event, for instance, I got something back on Twitter, and it wouldn't be the first time I've been trolled on Twitter for talking about race and ethnicity. And they said, well, you know, I think that BAME groups are overrepresented. We are a marginalized group. And my first thought to speak to that was, well, that if like 14%, I think it was, identified as non-white in the 2011 census. Only 3% of therapists that are registered with my accrediting body identify as BAME. That's millions of people falling through a gap, unable to access mainstream mental health care, and also unable to access it for themselves externally. You know, if you are experiencing racism, you are more likely to have poor psychological health. You're more likely to be in distress. You're more likely, as already been mentioned, to be sectioned. There's the youth justice system. There's unmet needs across the board here. We're more likely to experience poverty. We have poor educational outcomes that prevents people from getting into my profession in the first place. You know, I had it looking at the professionalization of straight hair. I relaxed my hair until I ended up with hair 2 inches long, until I recognized, and I was really lucky to get fantastic therapy on the NHS, until I recognized my hair is a part of me, and to honor it, to honor my mixed heritage, and to be able to be integrated as a human being. You know, when we, obviously the groups that I work with, LGBTQIA+ groups, according to Stonewall, 60% of Black people have experienced racism from within the LGBTQIA+ community. Something has to change. We have to have these difficult conversations. We need to be given the platform, not just because you feel it's the right thing to do, not because you're virtual signaling or expect us to code switch. Do it because we should have been equals all along. And those challenging feelings you're going through, they're testament to your growth.
Thanks, Zaina. And you know, to all of our attendees, to all of our past participants, if you've got a question for anybody on the panel, please just post it, and we'll get these questions asked. Zaina, you used the term code switching. Do you think you can expand on that? Because I'm not sure everybody understands what code switching is.
So code switching is it's an adaptive response. Okay, I've just seen somebody come through to sign up to the Halo Code. Fantastic on you. It's about the fight for natural hair in schools. Thank you so much. Code switching is about we go into a space and you go in and you assess. You assess whether that space is safe and secure enough for you to be you. I find this across all marginalized communities that I work with. So it's not necessarily just Black people, but we will play up or we will play down facets of our personality. And what that does is it can create a maladaptive coping mechanism where we get the person in the middle really is.
Thank you, and the power, in the messaging there, it really is this, feeling safe, adaptive behaviour. It is the, we're talking very much about, we want people to bring their whole selves to work, their whole selves to initiative, their whole selves to projects. And the reality is, we learn very much as, an underrepresented group or as a minority, we learn code switching. And often, if we bring our whole self, then that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It's not an excuse not to do it, by the way. But, that is some of the reality of that experience. Yeah. Any questions coming through? I will have a little look and ask them in due course. But Zaina, thank you. I mean, and also for referencing the media. The media has a significant part to play, and I know you podcast and you're a columnist, so that some of that resonates. But before we move to Shane, a question, is the media for changing, or do you think that the media is a monolithic, complex institution that is always just going to go its own way?
Is the media for changing? I think it is. I think it's slow. I always say we won't necessarily see all the fruits of our labours. That's for the people. That's for our children. I've got 5 children and I want a better world for them going forward. We need to vote with our feet. We need to say when things are being published, which are wrong, which are incorrect, and which perpetuate the narrative. I myself want to avoid being seen as the angry Black woman. That's a narrative that is perpetuated across all of media. We should be able to show up as our true and authentic selves wherever we are. And if it's somebody else's problem, then it's their problem, not ours.
We might come back to the angry Black woman syndrome. I have to say, had that labelled and thrown at me a couple of times when I want to express an opinion. Yeah, absolutely. Zaina, thank you. All right, so Shane, as our male representative on this panel, and very, very diverse experience. So how do we achieve real inclusion, through that philanthropic lens, advocacy, inclusive design? Over to you.
Thanks, Sue. I think there are 2 sides of this for me. There's philanthropy on one side, because that's what I've been doing for a significant period now. But then on the other side, there's kind of tech inclusion. So there's a duality to it. I'll try and explain a little bit of it. So from one side, what you have is there's an understanding as a philanthropist, myself, in this space, as someone who's gone for a career in philanthropy, that there aren't very many Black people in this space. So most of the spaces I go into, most of the meetings I go into, I'm the only Black person. And that's been the case for a significant period of time. So that means that, as Zaina was talking about, their cultural competence is sometimes lacking in these spaces. And I see part of my role in terms of what I do on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis is to bring that back into the space through what I write, through policy work, but also through what we fund as an organization. So that's kind of one side of it. So, and for me, that on a day-to-day basis, in terms of living that means inclusive co-design in everything that we do. So every aspect of the work that we're involved in, we have an inclusive co-design aspect to it. Because I think that most large institutions, particularly with what's happened over the last year, understand that, I think the best way to put it is that there's a realization that you cannot solve social problems in a digital space, but elsewhere, without including those who actually experience them. And that's been the case for a long period of time. You've had a number of institutions and organizations that aren't really linked to what we might call diverse communities, making decisions for those communities. And then in some cases, even blaming them when the solutions don't work. So a lot of the work that I do is to try to redress the balance around some of that, but also the idea that how we do something is almost as important as what we achieve. And I'll explain that. So effectively what you have is, there are loads of situations where people have great intentions and yet fail because they reinforce damaging and limiting representations and internal policies and ideas that misrepresent those they want to work with. So there's a massive piece of an ongoing work that needs to be done in that space. The other thing is that large institutions have, over a long period of time, I suppose, become very comfortable with the idea that if you have power, if you have resources, and if you have influence, then you're right. And I think so a large part of my work working for a large organization and at the National Lottery Community Fund was to convince people that they don't have all the answers, and the answers they seek are in those communities they purport to serve. So that's one side of things. So and I can kind of talk more about that afterwards. But the tech inclusion is the other side. Now, this is new to me. So I come from, I was working at the National Community Fund, latterly on the Phoenix Fund, which was about getting money into the more money into the Black community during a very, very difficult time. And us seeing the disproportionate number of applications at that time. So coming into this new space, I came into work at Avast, and which, for those of you that don't know, is a cyber tech company, large company worldwide. And I came into a huge fanfare on Bloomberg, which made me nervous as a Black person, because I thought, well, what are they setting me up for here, right, in this space? But what I've begun to do is to kind of troll through this whole idea of the promise of the internet, the original promise of the internet, the freedom, the access to information, all of this stuff, equity, real equity. And then to begin to match that against what's happening in the space currently, and talk more about tech inclusion, because what I found is that on one side, there's a huge appetite for change and a huge appetite for innovation happening in the sector, because it's still a new space, a very, very new space. But on the other side, what I've realized is that there are tech designers who are ignoring inequalities. And so what that means is that they end up reproducing them through their work, which is hugely problematic for us as Black people. So once again, it goes back to this idea that for me, if you're on one side, you have this huge area of potential expansion for us as people, this whole digital revolution. But on the other side, what you have is this threat of almost locking in old bias into new algorithms. There's a lot more work that we need to do in that space as Black people. And that, once again, it goes back to what everyone's been saying. Every one of my esteemed colleagues on here has been saying, our voices need to be heard in that space, because when you're not in the room, all kinds of things happen. So a couple of years ago, Amazon embarked on a journey to try and find algorithms to make it easier for them to recruit. And many of you may remember this, it's 2018. And what they found was that they eventually had to shelve, although nascent, they'd begun to use some of these ideas in their work, and they found that they had to shelve the idea because it just discriminated against women. Because the algorithms were searching previous applications, tech applications, in the search for new blood. But what happened there was that they were essentially mainly male. So it saw female as bad in the algorithm, and therefore began to just chop out automatically female candidates. Now, that's one example, but there are too many examples to mention of where that's happening in the space at the moment. And so our voices need to be, so part of the work I'm trying to do is to make sure that our voices are clearly heard and involved in these discussions that happen. And this is happening on Facebook, it's happening with TikTok, it's happening with Instagram, across the board. So I think that in terms of the two spaces, they're the two spaces I kind of exist in. I think that in terms of the work that needs to be done, for me, the prevailing narrative today, and the clarion call, as it were, is just that, which is we need more Black people in philanthropy. That's a fact. But we also need more Black people involved in tech. And I know it's beginning to happen, but it needs to happen quicker. And more people need to realize that if they're not, these decisions are going to be made anyway. And if they're not involved in them, it's likely that they won't like the outcomes.
Shane, thank you. I'm carrying that old bias, new tech, really, absolutely, Oh, yeah, so we've got a couple of questions starting to come in. So start with you, Shane, actually. Jeanette has asked, how can we use technology to pull together in an accessible way the great work that many Black organisations are already doing? So how can we use technology to pull together in an accessible way?
That's a really, really great question. I think that and it's one that I'm exploring myself at the moment. There's another question on top of that, which is how do you do that? I found, which is a separate question, which is how do you do that in a safe space? Because there are lots and lots of different apps out there that are set up with a view to catalyzing social mobility, catalyzing community groups to do all manner of things. The challenge with that often is that they are harvesting your data. So and that becomes a problem. So where can you go and do that? And I mean, so the answer to the question is, I am trying to look at, there are loads of forums in which you can do it. What I'm trying to do is find equitable spaces you can do it in where people aren't harvesting your data, which is the major problem for me. And having control over your identity and your own freedoms for me over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be one of the biggest issues in this space. So in the short term, I think forums like this, being able to share in a forum that's everybody on here, which is crazy, everybody on here that's involved in this, Black Inclusion Week has been just given their own time to this. So there's no monetary incentive here. Everyone is just trying to help somebody else. So these are great forums to spread good ideas, to share, to make links and networks. And there are many others like them coming up over the next week. So these kind of spaces I think are good. I hate to go the opposite way and say I would be careful in some forums, because although the organization, usually the large institution behind them, is trying to encourage you to do this in those spaces, there are lots of people listening. And I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but there are lots of people listening. There are lots of people harvesting your data. So you have to be careful where you do those things.
Another question for you, Shane, around, do you have any tips or strategies for how we go about, in terms of the recruitment process, engaging more Black people into the tech and space?
Yeah, another area that I'm working on. I'm new here. Give me time. So it is a good question. I think that there's some great initiatives like Black Girls Code and others that have been going for a long period of time. I think it's almost, the fact is that at the moment what you have what you have to do is, and I found the same when I was working at the National Community Fund, what you have to do is to move past this space that we get in, where we almost look at the human aspect of this. So we say, okay, inclusion is good because we all want to kind of sing Kumbaya and run off into the hills together and that kind of stuff. And that's why it's really important to do this. There's another side to this completely. And I talked a lot about this at the National Community Fund, which was this. It's about excellence. It's about being good at what you do, first and foremost. So if you look, I think a couple of years ago, Goldman Sachs was saying they weren't taking any more companies. I think this is in 2019. They weren't taking any more companies public unless they had a diverse board. They're not doing that because they want us all to stand in circles, skipping together. They're doing it because it makes money, right? Fundamentally. It goes back to what Sandra was saying. We will be better off as an economy if we can work together and have more diverse workplaces, more diverse boards. So there is a humanist aspect to it, in which it's the right thing to do, from a moral perspective. And so if it's about your moral compass, it's the right thing to do. But also it's about excellence. And so I think that in terms of getting more voices in, what we've seen, particularly in philanthropy, but also in tech, is that when you have diverse groups involved, people make money. If it's philanthropy, so for instance, National Community Fund, it also applies, because what you do is you don't waste public money. By having true knowledge equity, which is understanding what communities can bring to the table and utilizing that and being intentional about that, what you do is you can force a paradigm shift for a number of different communities and save public money. So you see, a lot of the time these things come down to money, the discussions come down to money, but it's about excellence. If you want to be the best company that you can be, and you want to get the best ideas, the most diverse ideas, the most expansive, then you need a diverse community working on whatever it is. And so for me, that's always been the kind of precursor to any kind of discussion and the opening gambit in moving this whole situation forward.
Right. Thanks, Shane. Thank you. This is obviously a topic that just can grow and grow and grow. We could just have a whole session around this. But at the heart, I'm hearing, you know, very much echoing the sentiment of change and us being the change also. I'm going to give you all just literally a kind of a 20 to 30 second ask. There was a question here because Zaina, you used the term BAME, and as we know, there's a lot of debate at the moment. Language is shifting and starting to change. So to each of you as panelists, what are your views on the term and the use of the word BAME, and do you have any recommendations or suggestions or observations of where in other places they're not using the word BAME, they're using something else? So Zaina, can we start with you?
Absolutely. So I saw this question and I actually answered it in the chat, and then I've just answered it in the Q&A. So I predominantly, absolutely, BAME is a contentious issue. Does it include everybody? Well, actually, it probably excludes more than it includes. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's an equitable term. However, it's predominantly used in business. I shared a link in the chat and in the Q&As to a place called #BAMEover. I use the term those who experience racism predominantly, because that kind of means everybody, and I'm not excluding everyone. So those bits are in the chat and in the Q&A, but I'm sure if you Google #BAMEover, that would take you to a document that came from a survey. I think it was about there was quite a few people that were surveyed, and there were some suggestions. If you're looking to change the use of the word BAME to something else within your corporation, then there could be some ideas there for you.
Thanks, Zaina. Ifra, have you got a view on the word BAME?
I completely agree that it excludes more than it includes, because a lot of people find it so easy to just use those letters and assume that that's it, like the box is ticked and we've done our part for today, especially when we're talking about media earlier and the representation. Sometimes when we're talking about key issues that impact a lot of people that fall under those letters of BAME, like making sure the representation is actually from the right voice. Sometimes like it's something that's ignored by just using the word BAME as an answer for everything. So do I have an answer for it as the alternative? No, at the moment. However, do I think is a complex thing that we need to be looking at? Then yeah, I love the fact that ethnic minority groups, it's a suggestion, but why is it a minority? Like, I don't like the fact that the word minority suggests we're less than like kind of like everybody else. So to be fully inclusive, why are we lazy and just saying the short letters? Why can't you just say the names of who you are trying to speak to in the areas that you want to address?
Thank you. Sandra, do you have a view?
Yes, I do actually. The Race at Work survey is open. I've told you, I tried to solve this in 2015. One of the terms I've included is ethnically diverse. It gets rid of the minority thing, and it doesn't, and I am saying you use that if you're not talking about Black people from, be African heritage or Caribbean heritage or Pakistani or Bangladesh. It's where you are dealing with a specific group, be specific. But actually, I know a lot of people don't like minority either. So we're testing multiple terms, BIPOC, people of color, the whole lot. And last time we had more than about 8,000 people vote as to what you want to be called. So the question is out now and it is live, because we want to come back with evidence to say, you know what, this is what people like per se, or this is preferred. But I'm absolutely, I think it matters, because first I'm like, oh, what's the matter with everybody? We're making progress. Can we not get stuck here? But actually, if it matters, for those who it matters, language does matter. So, let's care about it, but let's not get stuck there so that we cannot make progress. So I think ethnically diverse, because it takes out that minority word what people hate, but actually you only need it for public speaking or for writing. Beyond that, you can just call me Sandra, yeah? And call us by our first names. Hello.
And hopefully we've got a poll that's just come up. Yes, it has. Do you agree with the term BAME? Yes, no, or not sure. Shane, have you got anything you want to say about the
I agree, totally agree with Sandra. Let's not get hung up on it too much, and let's not. And then if we were saying let's not be lazy, I think that's the other thing. People get lazy about these things. I like ethnically diverse, but I also like global majority. I think it just says something completely different, global majority. But then if you add global ethnic majority, it spells gem, which is lovely. We want to be called gems. That's great, you know. So that works for me. So that's yeah. I mean, I don't get too hung up on about it, but I recognise it can force people into being lazy. But also, I also worry that we get sidetracked by it, you know. So, but right now we have a fulcrum moment, so it's an opportunity for us potentially to say something different. So let's be gems instead. Gems is nice.
Thank you. Now, I am mindful that the clock is running away with us, absolutely, as it's kind of 5 to 1 now. Oh, and the poll results have just come up. Interesting. So do you agree with the term BAME? So we've got a large majority, 73% saying no, 22% saying not sure, and 5% saying yes. So quite interesting. So another indication, let's have our voices heard, yeah? So in the last closing minutes, one of the things we are asking everybody throughout the whole of this week is to post who are your Black heroes, who are your Black heroines. So I'm going to ask all of our panel members, you know, who are your Black role models, your heroes, your heroines, who are they? So who would like to go first? Zaina, I'm going to pick on you.
Was that eye contact? I should know by now. Right. So, Lady Phil, proud Black lesbian, founder of UK Black Pride, consistently putting their head above the trenches and not accepting the current dynamic, either outside or inside the community, always fighting for others, and an absolute gem.
Fabulous. Ifra.
I'm going to be greedy and tell you 2 people, and I'll just say, and the reason why is because the first person is Mamie Till. She is an incredible voice who was the inspiration of a lot of people's activism, from Rosa Parks to Muhammad Ali to us all the way down here, because of the decision she made in showing the harrowing, like really heartbreaking image of Hassan's picture. And when we look at how Black Leaders Network started with the video that we watched of George Floyd, then when I was thinking about that, like, it just showed that when we see horror right before our eyes, it forces people to actively act. And that, I was thinking about her spiritually, and I just had to mention her name.
Ifra, thank you. Shane.
This one's always tough for me. I don't go bundle on heroes, so it's always tough. There are loads of people who've influenced me during my life. I always name drop the fact that I met Archbishop Desmond Tutu one time, and he gave me some really great advice. And it was just the fact that I was banging on about all this injustice and all this stuff, and he just said to me that being right isn't enough, and being good isn't enough. You have to be able to articulate those ideas to a number of different communities. And I went away thinking about that for about a week. So and that was really good. It sent me in a slightly different direction. Apart from that, probably people who a few people put their parents and other things in the chat. For me, the people who don't get any, I mean, I am credited with lots of things that I had kind of tangential involvement in, but there's so many people that every day I see doing great things that get absolutely no credit for them. And so I'm kind of more in that space, you know, trying to uplift those individuals and give those people a platform. So more than the heroes thing, but I'm looking at some of the great heroes that other people have, and a lot of those people have influenced me as well.
Yeah, thank you. Sandra.
I'd have to say my parents, particularly my dad who's passed, who was not afraid of any human being, and kind of instilled that in me, that, hey, people are human, don't be afraid of them. And then Nelson Mandela, because in the face of the horrific treatment, came out with dignity and came out and started ruling the country. I mean, there must be a masterclass in action there. And I really admired what he did. People thought, oh, it's going to be terrible, but just disarmed them and came out with dignity and ended up getting to the top. So love him.
Brilliant.
example.
Thank you. So, you know, to all of our attendees, to all of our participants, you know, what would be absolutely fabulous is, you know, go out onto LinkedIn and, you know, social media, different platforms, and just post who some of your heroes, your heroines, the people that you admire, the people that have helped you on your journey. You know, as we all encourage ourselves, you know, to be the change and to be activists in this space, you know, it's also about acknowledging that, you know, that there are trailblazers, there's pioneers, there's people out there that are doing it, as are all of us. Yes. So encourage you please to, you know, step away from this, be as I always say to everybody, go and be amazing, shine brightly, find your voice, participate, act, become activists, become active allies. Action is important. Don't just be indifferent. Don't just sit on the sideline and expect change to happen. That's not how change works. And you know what? Some days we're a little bit tired, so we move a little bit more slowly. On other days, guess what? We step up, we turn the volume up. So the key thing is all of us just to keep moving forward. Anyway, our time today has come to an end. I hope you've enjoyed, you know, the perspectives, the views, opportunity just to connect around Black inclusion. It's important. It's as the video showed and friends have shared, and opinions of and those of you in the chat that have continued to exchange comments, you know, this matters. So enjoy the rest of the week, enjoy the rest of the events. This afternoon, as I said, we've got the index session, which should be absolutely fabulous. So if you want to have a voice, you want to talk about leadership and you want to talk about business, go and join the session this afternoon. All right, so everybody, a huge thank you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for showing up, and thank you for being the change. Thank you.